Welcome back. Ladies and gentlemen, Skyline D have extinguished the Fire Fang, knocking them down to the lower bracket. Now we're back with Series 2 of the China Regionals of the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. I am your host, Adrian Healingstad Archerlock, and I'm joined by the future here. We've got Sloot and we've got Nagura joining us. You were watching that last series backstage, Nagura. What did you think of the first team, Skyline D?
I think Skyline was super good. They did really clean pulls. They were really fast. It's going to be very difficult for whoever's advancing this match is going to have a hard time against Skyline D.
Yeah, of course. And of course, like you say, the first series has been completed, so we've got our semi-finalists there, but this series will decide which team is going up against them. And Skyline Top, of course, the sister team, one of the other Skylines, we've got a few of them in this tournament, looking to go up against their opposition here, go up against Skyline D, but they've got CBA. This is probably one of the closest matches we're expecting, right? This is 4th versus 5th in the China region. Both these teams having very similar times.
Not much to say. There are similar times. It's going to be really interesting. It's all going to come down to, honestly, I think what the loser's pick starts to be after Mauve Souls, because all the teams are just so well ironed in Mauve Souls. All it takes is that one slip, and the other team will take it no problem. So it's going to be about those counter picks and that third affix that we keep mentioning.
Yeah, and of course, we've talked a little bit about the format. It's still best of 3. We have that double elimination, but it really does come down to, in that last series, we saw the character lock-ins were quite important. We saw Restoration Druids galore in that last one. No Holy Paladins. What did you think of the Restoration Druid picks, Nagura?
I think Resto Druid does a lot of damage compared to Holy Paladin, but I think Holy Paladin is safer overall, and I think we're going to see Holy Paladin in this series.
Okay, we're looking for some Holy Paladins then. Of course, once that first game has been locked in, we will expect to see the same characters played out throughout the entirety of the series. And affixes was the other big thing we wanted to talk about. Last time, we saw the kind of counter pick to the double rogue, still not really stopping Skyline D in their tracks. Anything we're expecting in this one?
It's tough to say because we'll have to see exactly how the first match plays out. Truthfully, yeah, I mean, Necrotic is something that really kind of shakes up the game. I'm surprised I didn't pick perhaps an explosive, especially versus that triple melee. But, you know, I mean, they both kind of struggled with the same things, or should have struggled with the same things. But, I mean, Skyline D just did everything cleaner. Those mass pulls, AoE gripping everything together, getting the damage in that the tank can, and then just getting on out of there and kiting.
Yep, Skyline D definitely set the stride, but now we're looking for Skyline Top versus CBA. Once again, we will be starting on more of Souls. These teams on the even match, it will be the same affixes also as we head into this first game of the second series of today.
Here we are again, Mauve Souls. We've seen this dungeon many, many times in our time playing the Legion expansion. And I think right out the gate, you know, just like we were discussing with Jack in the previous years, we're probably going to see something pretty similar. They're going to hug the right side of that bridge, pull everything together, and I would expect both teams pull Imran as well with everything.
Yes. It's going to be a very big pull here. I'm not sure if they're both going to pop Bloodlust. Some teams like keeping Bloodlust for the boat pull later on, but it seems like both teams are doing the same pull, yes.
So as you mentioned, we actually do see 2 Holy Paladins on both sides, and I guess that's a safer pick, especially with this bursting affix to make sure that they can pre-immune if needed. But what kind of advantage would that bring over those Resto Druids into this sustained healing with these big packs?
I think a Holy Paladin just brings more safety, more utility. They have more cooldowns. As you said, Bop is very, very good, especially in this big pull for melees because it's very dangerous. They have a lot of cleave abilities, those trash mobs, so it's very difficult to stay alive as a melee, especially if you do those very big pulls and it's very difficult to see.
Both teams doing an excellent job here, really clean, no deaths so far. We're having a few dips on the tank, as to be expected with these kind of big pulls. Of course, both teams doing a good job to make sure that they get into the boss to spawn those skeletons, because those swirlies do spawn around players there. I mean, both teams, you know, neck and neck right now, in the 30s right now. They seem to be pulling just slightly ahead over for CBA.
Yes, they're very, very close to each other. We see the comps are pretty similar. They have one range, double melee, both teams. We do see an arms warrior though, which is interesting.
It is very interesting indeed, and we do have the Warlock, but again, no Windwalker monks.
Yes.
Really surprising to see.
Where are the Windwalkers?
Yeah, they're somewhere in the wind. Now, of course, Imran about to fall on both sides. Actually, in this Skyline Top has indeed actually pulled ahead now. They will be getting ready as you see the Warlock. They're pre-positioning to make sure that they click that horn right away to save any precious second they can of getting downstairs in the boat.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how big the pulls are going to be in the boat. We saw some very big pulls coming out of Skyline D earlier in the series before. Let's see how big the pulls are going to be in this matchup.
Now, of course, Skyline does not have the option of mass stealthing through some of this trash. They do not have a rogue available to them. We are seeing some of these bigger pulls, as we mentioned earlier. Now, a lot of dangerous mobs here, a lot of cleave damage that can go out onto the group, not to mention those barrels going out, of course, the quaking still going out on the group, and the tank getting absolutely nuked by some of those very sinister strikes from these mobs. The Swift Blades, of course, that do just an immense amount of damage.
We saw the team earlier also pull the Mariner, which is an interesting pull that not many teams do. Let's see if they pull the Mariner as well, or if they're going to skip it.
So we actually did have a death go down over on CBA's side. Their Hunter did plop down for a second. Back up immediately, of course. Once you reach this downstairs area of the ship, you do checkpoint at the cages, so easy for them to res and hold on to that battle res. Well done by them not to kind of lose their cool and immediately battle res. Skyline, of course, moving over after that pull, getting ready for the remainder of the ship. And, you know, CBA not doing a bad job. They did have that one death, but they're cleaning up the rest of the trash, and we'll be trailing them in just a moment.
Yeah, still very close. Now we see the Mariner here. Let's see how they're going to skip it, or if they're actually going to pull it. I think they're going to skip it.
We actually do have a death coming over on Skyline as well there. The Demon Hunter goes down, just reses, comes back up. We'll see in a moment if they're going to pull it. If they're going to pull it, they got to do it soon because he's about to patrol away in just a moment. The tank is setting up for it, so they do pull it indeed. Now, we discussed this earlier. The most dangerous mob in this entire dungeon by far. The tank, I believe, yes, a tank opting to pull everything to the side does proc that purg immediately. So what they did here, of course, for those at home, is they pulled those 3 dogs plus the Grime Lords, off to the side while the rest of the team safely ran upstairs. The tank sacrificed them themselves, and then they safely res them upstairs as to avoid that Grime Walker, which has a huge amount of HP.
Yeah, CBA actually has a little bit of an advantage because they have a Hunter, and the Hunter can pull it to the side, and so the tank does not have to die, and to save some time because they can keep pulling while the Hunter is coming back.
And we do know how precious those 5 seconds are from a death. Harboron, of course, now being pulled over from CBA, doing a well opening with them. Now, of course, we did see typically in the time trials that some of these teams would actually pull the 2 champions up to Harboron. We don't see that. We don't see that from CBA, but Skyline Top seems to be doing just that. Now, this was problematic for Firefang in the last series as they kind of managed to not control them very well. Eventually, they did wipe. You do have to manage triple interrupts here. There are 2 champions with the fears, and of course, the ad that Harboron spawns that must be interrupted, else there is a massive amount of damage on the group.
Yes, if one cast goes through either from the ad or from the boss, then it's going to be devastating for either group.
Yeah, so moving on here now, we do know that this Nether Rip ability from the boss is kind of an area denial Nagura, and we do know, of course, that the ads that are spawned that stun one of the players, spawning 3 to 4 ads at once, are targeted on players. So it's really important for the group, of course, and as you know, of course, sometimes range and healers can get caught out. If they don't run over to the boss in the meantime, it makes it very difficult, especially if some of these void zones spawn between the tank, the boss, and where the ranged are.
Yes, exactly. That's why we see the Hunter coming closer to the boss every time an ad spawns, so the boss doesn't have to be moved towards the ad.
Indeed, indeed. Harboron now down to 30% over for CBA, so they're pulling just a bit ahead. Both teams at exactly 50% of the trash completed. They seem to have no problem handling the 2 champions upstairs, but they're still trailing behind by about 45%. A lot of this is obviously going to come down to how these huge pulls, what I predict to be huge pulls, of course, on the upper levels of the ship coming up, how they're going to turn out. And, you know, from a healing and from a range perspective, too, these can be really quirky.
Yes, especially the very big pull where you pull the whole boat together. It's going to be interesting to see if one of those teams does this big pull, if they also pull the mini boss, because then it gets very dangerous.
And, you know, the interrupts are of big danger, too. Not only are there the champions that you need to interrupt the fear for, but also a lot of those castings like the Torrent of Souls that heals and does a ton of damage. And, ironically, a Moonkin is actually usually very good in that situation, but they don't have that AoE interrupt. They do have, I would assume, I do see some Blood Elves on the menu there. So we will have some of those Arcane Torrents and, of course, some of those stuns from the Havoc Demon Hunter, too.
Okay, so we see CBA, the tank actually sky-stepped and walked through, so they're pulling the whole boat. I'm not completely sure if they pulled the mini boss as well, but this is a huge pull.
Yeah, right behind this lovely pillar. Excellent, excellent job. We now see everything. They did not pull Skill. I still saw him at the start here. Now, there's a ton of damage that could go out onto the group here, not to mention the tank. So this is presumably where everyone's going to pop absolutely everything to stay alive and do as much damage as possible. They do miss one of the interrupts on the champion right now, but the healer does well to stay out of range to be able to dispel anybody that might have been feared by that champion. In the meantime, Harboron finally going down from Skyline Top, and they too will be doing what seems to be a huge pull. Everybody sky-stepping and getting right to the front of that ship.
We saw one death here at CBA, the rogue died. This is a very difficult pull because if you do one mistake, then everything can fall apart, especially because there's healers too. And if you don't interrupt the healers, then this pull, either you have to wipe it or it's going to take forever. But they're doing really well so far.
So we do see that LOH go up on the blood DK there, saving him when he was low percent. We haven't seen the perk proc. He gets down to 1% there, still no perk. He must have popped perk by now. Yes. He's solo. Everybody's solo. He goes down. The Hunter goes down as well. Now they do well to recover the remaining ads by running right back up up to where the checkpoint is. Unfortunately, one more death on... Oh, no, actually, that was a cheat death from the Rogue, so the cheat death won't be available for the Rogue there for about 6 minutes now. And, you know, in a similar pull, the problem is both teams just kind of ran out of gas before the packs died. So they're caught in a situation where they do need to kite, and if they're caught off guard, as we saw, there's a few deaths on the board now.
Yeah, thankfully, there were only a couple of mobs left when a tank died, so it was easy for them to cut it off and just recover. And now they are on the minibus.
Interesting to see that, Nagur, that none of the groups opted to pull Trash with Skjall. That's usually a bit of an advantage, especially for the Rogues, you know, with all that Shuriken Storm and all that single target damage that they could feed from an AoE environment.
Yes, a Rogue gets a lot of single target damage by having additional mobs, but there are the skeletons, the mini-boss spawns by itself, so maybe they think that's enough, or maybe it's too risky to pull everything at once.
It's possible. So Skjall it is important to position well for Skjall. He will blink to one of the ranged players, or one of the players, period. So if you're standing a bit too far out, it might be make it a bit difficult to interrupt that Defiant shout. That will, of course, debuff players with 10% damage, increase taken, and will need to be dispelled as a result. In the meantime, though, Skyline top catching up, and now they're in a position where they're actually in favor of the death counter. They're only 4 versus CBA's 5 at the moment.
Yes, this is going to be very close still. There's mistakes that can happen at the last boss, so if everything goes well, then CBA is probably going to win, but they have a lot of single target damage in Skyline, especially because a Warlock is very, very good at the start, and, well, a Hunter is good as well, but they also have a Rogue to deal with the tentacles.
That Warlock is going to be dishing it out on those tentacles. Of course, there will be a bit of RNG where those tentacles spawn. We do know that that Destructor can indeed spawn in the back of the ship as well, which will give a nice advantage to some of those ranged players, and not so much the melee. Now, we do have Skyline just cleaning up the remainder of Skjall. They'll be heading downstairs in just a moment. CBA now spawning Helia. She has a bit of RP prior to getting started in that first phase, Nagur, where we do know we have to kill 6 of those tentacles before we can advance to second phase.
Yes, it's going to be interesting to see how the Destructor tentacles spawn, because as you said, it's going to be a big advantage if they have good spawns, especially for the Hunter.
For the Hunter, indeed. So the first 3 O's do start at the front of the ship. Now, it is important for the group, especially when they know that 30-second timer is coming up for the next Destructor, that they kind of join the tank towards the front of the ship, because if one can spawn right under them and hit them immediately, and you'll have a death easily, the team does well there to move to the left side of the ship and avoid that spray from Helia in the meantime. And now we finally see Skyline top jumping down and getting ready to engage Helia as well.
Yes, so quaking is also kind of a problem in this boss. As you said, there's holes that come up on the boat. So if there's quaking and you need to spread apart with this many melee, then it might be difficult and it might be a bad timing to the tentacle spawns at the same time as you spread out for the quaking.
Yep, so now we do see Skyline top just now starting. There are a few tentacles behind actually at this point. And in the meantime, CBA cleaning up the last 2 tentacles, making sure to avoid the hole-in-one by falling in one of the gaps in the hole. Eventually, Helia will go down and she will punt everyone to the front of the ship at the bottom here and start her second phase in just a moment. They do well once again to avoid and skip to the right side of the ship there. I mean, this is going to be really close. You know, CBA is not... They're more than 5 seconds ahead based on the death differential at this point. So, I mean, Skyline's going to have to really crank it out on Helia and hope for some good tentacle spawns here as well.
Yes. Unfortunately, there's no execute on Helia, so the Warrior's not going to have a big advantage at the very end, same as the Warlock. They do have double execute. Unfortunately, it's not helping for Helia.
So now we are seeing that we're having this bit of RP where the ship does get brilliantly shattered by Helia as she does come up. Now remember, of course, for those at home, she does not need to get to 0% here. She gets to about 70.5%, after which she will finish the encounter. From the moment she spawns here, you will have 1 minute before she goes underwater again for another 20 seconds kind of AFK phase where you're just avoiding some of the swirlies on the ground, and then you'll have another minute at a time once she comes up again. The goal here on this 22, especially, of course, Nagur, without that Tyrannical, is to really try and kill her before she goes down that first time.
Yes, it's going to be interesting to see if they manage to do a lot of damage so the submerge doesn't happen at all.
And this is... You know as well as I do, this is where the healers can really kind of flex that muscle, and Holy Paladins can dish out a fair bit of damage.
Oh yes, if Holy Paladin has all their cooldowns ready, or they're allowed to keep their cooldowns if there wasn't too much damage intake, then they're going to do a lot of damage in this last phase here.
So this is going to be really, really close here. We do have 6% differential. That is unfortunately more than 5 seconds in favor of CBA here, so Skyline's really going to have to crank the damage up if they can. They're really going to have to hope to kill Helia in that one phase, while CBA, hopefully for them, will fail to kill that one phase and have to wait for that 20-second submerge. They are getting near that point right now. Helia at 72%. She is going to submerge here, so all eyes on the right side of the screen for Skyline right now.
If they manage to kill it before the submerge, then they might actually kill it beforehand, but it's going to be very, very close. And the boss is still on 77%, so it's going to be close. It's
going to be really close. I think we're well past the halfway point of that first phase here. So, I mean, it looks like CBA should be able to comfortably take this. I mean, they CBA with anything else going on around them at the moment. Now, it is worth noting as well that, well, I thought the DK actually was just about to jump in the hole there. So they do finish up, no problem for them in the meantime, and it is going to be game 1 in favor of CBA, but a much closer match than what we saw last time.
Yes.
One, and we're of course going to allow Skyline top to finish it off. Only 4% remaining on Haoya once she does finally emerge from the depths and the poor ship that she's destroying at the moment.
It is worth noting, Adrian, that she went down at 74% for her kind of down phase there, whereas with CBA it went down at 72%. So definitely a lot stronger single target damage presence from Team CBA there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk about because, of course, we got both the Holy Paladins, as you called out, Nagura, before the game, which I do want to talk about separately, but we see the Warlock and the Warrior, which is something we didn't see in the first series. How did you think the Affliction Warlock and the Arms Warrior performed in this?
I think they did really well, especially because we've seen a lot bigger pulls coming out of them, like the whole boat pull and a lot of big pulls underneath the boat as well. So I think they did really well.
Yeah, and I think it was very interesting. Of course, we did see the Holy Paladins. Nagura, you were saying it's quite a safe pick. Do you think that's something we're going to see more often in this tournament, like going forward?
Ask me or her?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I think we'll probably both say the same thing here, is if we're going to base it on time trials and a lot of what we see on live too, more often than not, you would expect Holy Paladin. Maybe not to the same extent that you're going to see, you know, Blood DKs versus other tanks, but we'll probably see a pretty high representation of Holy Paladins, would be my guess.
Yeah, it just certainly seems that way. We've seen an even split so far between the teams where they do put their preferences. CBA wins that first one, 1-0. Of course, it's a best of 3, and now the loser advantages will come through with that map and the affix choices. But one of the things I did want to talk about that really stood out to me in this one is, I remember last year when we were doing the Mythic Dungeon Invitational, we saw a bunch of different pool paths, like teams more or less confident when it came to the ship, especially on More of Souls. But now we're seeing teams kind of trying to execute the same pools, and it's really coming down to who executes it better. But it seems like the strategies have been kind of like, they're similar for all the teams. Everyone has like a path they want to follow, which is the same, but it's just a question of who executes. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, definitely. We had all teams do similar pulls for sure. Some teams were a little bit slower in the big boat pull, like they took less risks, but overall we saw pretty much very big pulls and bigger than the last time around.
And of course, CBA, they were playing a much more generic composition. They had the Hunter, which is something we saw, I think, once in the last series. They, of course, had the Rogue and the Demon Hunter as two classes that we've seen a little bit. Do you think that Skyline top have any real way of kind of penetrating that composition when it comes to their affix and their map choice?
I'm not sure penetrating is... Yes. I'm going to be interested to see. You know, you always ask me this, Adrian.
Yeah, it's a difficult one.
I like
to put you on the spot a little bit.
No, it's fine. I'll throw it right back to you. It's going to always, with this, it always comes down to, is it going to be comfort pick or is it going to be trying to throw a curveball? You know, with the last series, it was a bit tougher to throw a curveball to such a well-oiled machine, as we talked about earlier. But the teams were so close together this time that, you know, especially, you know, as well as I do, in the books of having that Affliction Warlock, there's some affixes that are going to favor them more, you know, perhaps an explosive or something versus the other team.
Yep, Skyline top and CBA, they definitely had a close one, and it's something that we will see throughout the series. We'll have to see if it is close enough that that map advantage will help Skyline top going into the second game. CBA, though, clearly can BA, as they do manage to win that first game. The More of Souls have been defeated for them. China coming out with some pretty strong teams in these first series, as we see clean runs galore, but there's one more game. If they are to advance to the semi-finals of this, they have to beat Skyline top one more time, and we'll find out if they can do it after this. CBA take down Skyline in game number 1, More of Souls. 1-0 up in the series now. This is a best of 3, of course, so, you know, 1 game away from qualifying to that semifinals, getting closer to that top 2 that all these teams are fighting for. I am your host, Adrian Healingstat Archerlock, and joined once again by the future crew. We've got Sloot and we've got Nagura here, and it was quite a good series. I mean, honestly, looking at these first 2 series, China's got something here this year.
Yeah, it was close. And, you know, the times weren't too different from the first series we saw with the domination, of course, from Skyline D. I mean, it's good, and it's certainly well above what we saw last year from the Chinese. I mean, they're here to really hit home.
Do you think this is something where China's just become more competitive? I mean, of course, it does have a massive player base when it comes to World of Warcraft. Do you think it's something where China stepped up its game, or do you think this is something we're likely to see throughout all the regions, Nagura?
I think all the regions stepped up a little bit, but I think China especially stepped up, especially with the Skyline coming in, the similar org as you said as Method. But I think, yeah, all the regions are going to step up for this MDI.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it. In that case, of course, if you guys are joining us, it's different time zones. If you're European or North American, you're probably either saying goodnight to us shortly in North America or hello to us if you're in Europe. But we will have regions that are definitely specified to your time zones. We've got the APAC region coming up next, and then Europe and North America. Over the next 4 weeks, we will determine our top 8 teams globally for that $100,000 prize pool at the end of it. $25,000 on the line today separately in this region of China. But we are in the middle of a series right now, CBA versus Skyline Top, and of course one of the big things we should talk about is that kind of format. We've got the map pick and the affix pick coming up, and we've been saying like a few times already on this broadcast, it's very difficult to predict how these teams are going to go about it just because there's so many additional variables this year.
I think one of the biggest things to talk about, and we kind of touched on it at the beginning of the show, is really how do these teams practice for this? You know, it was easier to practice last time because you had kind of set affixes and you knew you could run them for the semis or the quarters or whatever they were, and now we have, you know, you have the 2 set affixes. We know the dungeon, but you have 7 different affixes that could be chosen by the other team at the moment. So there's a lot of options, and I guess, Adrian, it looks like they've chosen EOA. Yep,
I have a sure. It does seem to be highlighted on our brand new spanking broadcast package. Very happy about that. And I'm also hearing in my ear that Explosive is the affix coming out here. So do you think that's a little bit more of a comfort pick for these Holy Paladins, or do you think they are trying to counter the opposition?
Holy Paladin is definitely very, very good to kill explosives, but I think they pick Explosive because of the Warlock. I think a Warlock is very, very good at killing explosives. The other team does have a Hunter though, and the Hunter can go Beastmaster if they have trouble killing explosives, so that's an option for the other team as well.
What's going to be interesting about this map is that there's so many different, I mean, there are so many different pull patterns. Obviously, we see some similar ones on live, but there are options to not do as much trash or pull a lot of smaller pulls, you know, with a lot of those Gilbins and some of the crabs too. And, you know, the game doesn't care how many mobs you pull and how much health they have. The more you have, the more of these explosive orbs are going to spawn, and that you'll have to handle them too.
Yeah, the only thing I remember about this instance when I run it is that the seagulls are always pecking away at me, and it's really annoying. You love them?
No, I don't.
No, I think everyone hates the seagulls, right? But I have a shower. It's something we didn't see too much last year. It was coming out as kind of like a specialist pick. So why do you think it is that Skyline Top, who are running kind of an odd composition, they've got the Warrior as well as this Affliction Warlock that they locked in game 1. Do you think there's any way that this map specifically advantages them, Nagura?
Yeah, I think especially the last boss is an execute boss, so it's very good for the Warrior and the Warlock. But one team does have a Rogue, and there's some pulls you can do with a Rogue where you just pull everything to the boss and you get a lot of single target damage from Shuriken Storm. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do if they have like some special pulls going on, because there's so many mobs in this dungeon, you can do a lot of different pulls.
Yeah, and More of Souls is kind of the opposite to this dungeon, I like to think. Like, More of Souls is something where, I mean, we had the great grind at the start of Legion where everyone was running More of Souls to get their artifact power, and it's something that we've run as the starting map, not only for this MDI, but also for last year. Eye of Ashara is a little bit less tested, so where we saw the pulls coming out, and I'm actually hearing that we're ready to go into game right now, so I will disregard this point because we are going to find out momentarily, but I was just thinking, More of Souls, very easy pulls, very like straightforward, everyone's really got our grips of that. Eye of Ashara, we might see all kinds of different pool paths coming out here. It's going to be very interesting to see how these closely matched teams play out on this second map.
So Nagura, I mean, you and I both know there's a lot of ways that everybody can kind of pull out the gate here, and pretty typical as we expect. They pull that first 4 Naga pack with some of the turtles leading right up to these huts. They're probably going to, here we go, of course, AoE grip everything together and cleave it down. Now, they do have to be careful with how much they do pull because, you know, there is a bit of RNG, which doesn't usually happen in Legion, of course, but there's a bit of RNG involved with those spawning orbs. Sometimes you get a lot, sometimes you get a little. So if they overpull, as you were alluding to, you know, it's great for the rogue. He can do a ton of damage, but if they're falling behind on orbs and wipe, then nobody's winning here.
Yes, especially if you have trouble killing. If you don't have very good classes to deal with the explosives, you can be unlucky and have like 5 to 6 explosives spawn at the same time, and then it's going to be very difficult. As we said, though, they have 2 Holy Paladins to deal with them, and Holy Paladin is very, very good.
So it is worth noting as well that we actually do have bolstering on this map. So we have bolstering, explosive, and fortified. And of course, for those at home that are just tuning in now, not exactly sure what's going on, there's explosive. Some of these mobs will periodically spawn a big fell orb that if it's not killed will damage the entire party for 50% of their max HP. They can be LOS though. Of course, in this open Eye of Ashara map, there's not too many places where they can line of sight. And of course, we do have bolstering. Every trash mob that dies will buff everything around it for 20% HP and damage. So you want to make sure that you're killing everything together. And it's also going to stop these teams from kind of pulling trash with the boss as well.
Yes, so we see Teams CBA actually pulled the boss, and they skipped a lot of trash there to go to the boss, probably because of the Bloodlust timing, because they want to get Bloodlust off as fast as possible.
Totally possible. So both teams right now on Warlord Parjash. Of course, Warlord Parjash just spawned 2 mobs here. This spawns that Crest Rider and, of course, the Shellbreaker. The Shellbreaker is more of a melee mob. We want to interrupt its AoE cast. The Crest Rider is a bit more dangerous because you have to be careful. She does cast a heal after some time. So you want to make sure that you redirect, as they're doing here, the Impaling Spear from the boss into one of those 2 adds, meanwhile killing the other one. Typically groups do kill the healer most of the time, as the melee one could easily just be kind of tagged along with the boss and DPS down.
They also have Holy Paladin, they can bop the spear, so in case both of them die because there's too much AoE, then they can just bop, so there's one safety net there.
Right, you are. That spear is devastating. If it hits you, it will stun you for 8 seconds and do a massive dot in the meantime, so they do both have that advantage of bop, but also the Hunter can use that turtle as well if really needed, hopefully avoiding that. In the meantime, Skyline top is just pulling just a bit ahead here. Warlord Parja should be dropping for them first, and they are slightly ahead on trash percent too. The one, you know, about that 1% is nothing too much of an advantage right now. We are seeing both teams actually head off to the trash prior to Parjash right now, and the way they were going, they're actually pulling some extra trash that you don't typically see on live servers here.
Yeah, that's a very interesting pull. Usually you don't pull this back because there's some very difficult mobs in there, but yeah, they're dealing with it very well so far.
So Parjash now falling for Team CBA as well. We'll see if they kind of follow suit and do a similar pull. It actually looks like they're gearing up to do about the same thing right now. Nonetheless, they are making sure that everything kind of dies around the same time, of course, because of that bolstering. If one mob is too high health and they kill things unevenly, it will be a devastating, beyond boss level mob running around. It just takes ages to kill. The tank can't get near it. It does too much damage. You do see already the tank chunking, and a lot of damage being done over at Team CBA right now. A few deaths coming up on the board, and now full team wipe.
Full team
with
wipe,
the same pull as Skyline top, Nagura.
Yeah, as I said, it's a very difficult pull. That's why usually you skip this trash pack. So yeah, they probably missed an interrupt. Maybe it was a Wrangler casting the AoE that didn't get interrupted and just wiped the group.
You know, it's really interesting because a lot of groups these days kind of do that boat skip, what it's known as the boat skip, where after the first 3 bosses, they kind of jump up towards King Deepbeard. You know, they're not exactly perfectly tailored for doing that. They do have the Warlock, but he will have to be ferried up first by the Demon Hunter, so it'll take them a bit of time. It'll be interesting to see if the teams even opt to do that, because already out the gate, they're doing pulls that we're not really accustomed to, especially in the EU region.
Yeah, it looks like some very, very interesting pathing. I haven't seen those pulls at all before, so maybe that's why they picked this dungeon. Maybe they're very comfortable or found like a very interesting route, a good route, and let's see how they do. But yeah, the boat skip is going to be interesting to see if either of those groups do it, because there's no Druid and there's no class that can do it that well.
Yeah, Druids are usually key for that. In the meantime, of course, Skyline, as you alluded to, doing some of these pre-rehearsed pulls, predetermined pulls that they're very comfortable in doing. It's certainly a map that shows that, you know, they've been kind of used to pulling it, and there are a lot of neutral mobs, especially with those kind of goos coming up, which don't follow the same bolstering moves as aggressive mobs. So it'll be safe for them to collect some of the percent along with these enchantresses to make sure that once you kill 2 of them, you free up Lady Hate Coil.
Yes, so it's interesting to see if they actually pull the droplets to this boss here. I think the rogue group is going to do it for more single target damage. The other group, with a Warlock, you don't necessarily have to pull other mobs together to get more damage.
Yeah, so they'll have to be careful here indeed. So safely here, Skyline top, only pulling the Arcanist, and that most innocent, of course, turtle on the side was not evil at all, but they decided to kill it nonetheless. We'll have to have a word with Peter after this. In the meantime, of course, CBA just slowly moving as well. As you alluded to, they did indeed pull with those goos along with the Arcanist to feed that rogue single target damage, and I mean, we could just see the meters, nothing but yellow on top there.
Yes, it is quite a time loss to pull only one mob because everyone wants to use their cooldowns on AoE, and it's a lot slower to only pull one mob. So yeah, maybe the other group is going to pull ahead here.
Now we do know in this dungeon, of course, all of the first 4 bosses are variable in order. You can do whichever one you want first. You can only access the Wrath of Ashara, the final boss of the dungeon, once you kill the first 4. But a lot of teams here opt to actually skip Lady Hate Coil, deal with Serpentrix, and then kind of backtrack. And the reason they do that, of course, Nagura, is because of the wins.
Yes, so the wins get triggered once you kill one of the second bosses. As you said, you can choose any boss, and afterwards the winds will come and the seagulls will fly down. So having the winds on Serpentrix is actually kind of a trouble because he does a poison spit, and depending on where the wind is going, it can hit faster or slower. So it might be difficult to have the winds on Serpentrix.
Yeah, and it is important, of course, to note that those seagulls, we are not in a bay here. If we were, they would actually be called bagels, but we are out at sea, so they are seagulls indeed. Moving over towards actually the Serpentrix trash, which is what we alluded to earlier. Team CBA moving over there, pulling those really, really dangerous Hydras, have a huge amount of health too, so they're going to have to kind of baby pull with those to make sure that they don't bolster them, because if they pull a ton of crabs with that Hydra, we're going to have a bad situation.
Yeah, usually there's some very, very big pulls where you pull a lot of small mobs together, some droplets and some goblins together, but it is very difficult with bolstering because if you don't kill everything at the exact same time, then you're going to have some very big goblins.
So this is going to make for a really exciting time. We're actually seeing 2 different pull patterns here. We're seeing Team CBA rearing up to pull Serpentrix and clearing the trash around that boss. In the meantime, of course, Lady Hate Coil here being pulled by Skyline top. Now, Lady Hate Coil has a few notable things to watch out for. She does have that huge static shock that we just saw there. If you're not safely on one of those islands, you will be electrocuted and likely killed if you're not one of the tanks. And of course, we do have that kind of thunderstorm that hits the entire group. That does a huge damage. It splashes onto everyone, and most importantly, if you're on one of the islands, you will actually clean the island out. So you want to make sure you're spread well for those.
Yes, definitely. The higher the key, the more dangerous it's going to be. We saw them drop pretty low when the lightning came out, but they were all pretty safe.
So no shock here, none of them die indeed. She also does spawn some of those goos that we saw in the trash. Now those can be countered in one of 2 ways. You can actually hold on to them in order to kind of buff some, you know, for instance, like a rogue we were talking about. You know, the rogue will want to hold on to them to do that extra single target damage on her. You can also use this curse that you're seeing, that frontal breath come out of players. Once that curse dissipates, it actually does a frontal cone that will kill those ads, but also blow away any of those little islands around.
Yes, so it's also interesting to note that they don't have, both of the teams use Bloodlust on the first boss, so a lot of times you want to do Lady Hate Coil later, so you have Bloodlust for her, but they don't seem to have trouble with this boss without Bloodlust at all.
Well, keep in mind, we are in a fortified setting. If this was tyrannical, it would definitely be a different story, and you'd want that Bloodlust to get rid of it quickly. We do see those globules spawn, as noted before. Now, you know, we also have to keep in mind that these globules, since they're boss spawn mobs, they will not trigger bolstering on the boss, but the longer they're left alive, as we can see, they do spawn those explosives. So it's extra things that the players have to be wary for and make sure that they're, you know, dealing with properly, not letting explode. Huge damage coming out to the raid there, of course, from that focus lightning again, but it does set damage every time. So if they can survive one round, they know they can survive every round if everyone's topped off and healthy.
So we see CBA actually pulled Serpentrix now. They probably used Bloodlust on this boss, we will see later on, but they're actually behind in trash, so they're 6% behind in enemy forces.
Keep in mind, though, you know what, that's actually interesting because they pushed beyond.
Yeah, exactly.
They pushed beyond Skyline top, cleared some of that Serpentrix trash already, and they're still behind. So, but keep in mind, they also did not properly execute that last pearl after Parshas. They actually ended up wiping on that, and it did not return to it. So we're gonna have to see how exactly they recover from that. Lady Hate Coil, of course, going down over on Skyline tops. They will be heading over to their Serpentrix trash as well. In the meantime, Serpentrix having kind of 2 transitions to the same phase at 66 and 33% respectively. He will, or she will, or it will go down and spawn 2 of these heads. The arcane one, of course, usually being the more dangerous one, as you know, because it does have that increasing nuke damage on one of the players.
Yes, you do need to split up your damage to kill him at the same time and to have interrupts for both of the heads. But it is 45, so it usually should not be a big deal, even if one cast goes through. You just don't want to have multiple casts go through at the same time.
So I would reckon that this is probably a boss that is more advantageous, you know, for the Warlock rather than some of the melee, right? They can kind of multi-dot the heads. The melee don't have to peel off the boss, etc. So they should be able to make up a bit of time here for Skyline top. Once they do manage to aggro it, in the meantime, they're still kind of cleaning out those Hydras. We're going on to the second transition here from CBA. The heads do respawn. You want to make sure you get back in range of Serpentrix, the green head, the main boss itself. Otherwise, it will keep casting that AoE spell that just does increasing damage to the party. So somebody, usually the tank, will have to get enraged. Huge hits coming up from the arcane head on the party as well.
Yes, so the Hunter actually died. I think it was 2 casts coming through from the Hydras, from the 2 hats. They did battle res him though, so it's back to track.
But that's a wasted battle res as well. I mean, it was that arcane head that we were talking about. If left unchecked without, you know, let's say, I don't know, a lovely solar beam from, you know, a boomkin or something, it does do a mass amount of increasing damage. Now, there is a kind of strategy here on the second round where many teams will opt to kind of ignore the heads if they have enough CC and interrupts on them and just kind of kill Serpentrix. But we're seeing kind of halfway with that right here. CBA opted to kill one head, but kind of skip the other, and they kind of paid the price for it. We do have another death going down from the Rogue there. Of course, we did see that cheat death proc earlier. The final punishment has come out indeed, and the Rogue does go down. They opt intelligently not to use that second battle res because the boss is down here anyways.
Yeah, maybe they weren't on the same page here. Maybe some of them went on the hats and one call was going to boss, and maybe they just didn't, they weren't on the same page.
Indeed, and we have a pretty big pull here from Skyline top. In the meantime, of course, spawning a lot of these orbs. You know, the Warlock doing work there, we can see as well, with some of that drain and just all of these crabs being pulled. No problem though, bolstering doesn't affect them. The Rogue finally back up for Team CBA, and now they're going to kind of have to trade positions. Team CBA is going to have to kind of backtrack a bit towards Lady Hatecoil, as we're seeing now. They managed not to have to deal with those seagulls in the wind, but now they'll have to backtrack to Lady Hatecoil, where Skyline top are now pushing towards Serpentrix, the boss we just saw CBA kill, but they will have to deal with those winds.
Yes, we see they have 7 deaths actually, and they're 30% behind in enemy forces. They did skip the trash pack earlier where they wiped to, so I wonder if they have a plan B coming in here to get the rest of the percentage.
We'll have to see, but a big pull. Now, they haven't actually even spawned Lady Hatecoil yet, if I'm not mistaken, so they're actually killing that last Arcanist now with some of those droplets. And they have to be really careful. They aggro. I was just about to say, there's a seagull ominously floating by, unless they do aggro it. Now, the reason that this kind of, you know, joke about the seagull always happens is they're incredibly irritating mob that once aggro, whatever their primary target is, usually the tank, of course, although sometimes the Resto Druid or Boomkin will try to taunt them out of the group, they will occasionally disorient the tank, which causes the tank for 4 seconds to lose all threat on the mobs, which will promptly turn around and likely smack one of the melee in the face, and it will not turn out well for them. Serpentrix now about to be aggroed by Skyline top.
Yeah, so they're pulling Serpentrix. They have 89% of the trash, so they're almost done with trash, as they have to kill the 4 Nagas at the very end to spawn the last boss. And yeah, they're almost done. Then we'll see how they do the skip, actually, because I'm pretty sure they're not going to go through the tunnel because they have enough percentage already, so they're probably going to do the skip somehow.
No, for sure. I mean, they're going to have to. I would assume they likely kind of kill that snail with the multi-dotting from the Warlock once they go up to King Deepbeard. But yeah, they're going to have, I mean, they can do it. It'll just take them a bit of time.
Yes.
The Warlock, they'll probably have the DH ferry the Warlock up. The Warlock will put Warlock Portal down, open up the mount, and then port back up with the players nonetheless. So Serpentrix being worked on, of course, entering that first transition where we will see those 2 extra heads spawn the Arcane and the Fire. In the meantime, of course, Lady Hatecoil actually already quite low. A lot of that rogue damage, as we discussed earlier, they are opting to keep those adds alive for that extra single target damage buff from the rogue.
Yes, so they actually didn't drop very low at all from the AoE, so they don't have a problem to deal with this boss here. But as I said earlier, they're still pretty far behind in mob percentage, so there has to be something that goes wrong for Skyline top for CBA to actually catch up to them.
There has to be,
yes.
Or there will be. We'll have to see. Lady Hatecoil, of course, down to 40% now for Team CBA, dealing well with the adds. That Rogue just pulling further and further ahead on damage. Of course, most of it being that buffed single target damage, gaining so many combo points from being able to storm all of those adds nearby. Serpentrix now entering the second down phase for Skyline top. It seems to me at least, Skyline top way more comfortably dealt with the heads and interrupting them properly than did Team CBA.
Yes, for sure. There weren't any casts going through, at least I haven't seen any. The Warlock is very good to deal with the heads and also deal a lot of damage to the boss itself. It's going to be interesting to see if they actually ignore those hats now and nuke the boss, or if they're going to play the safe route and just go and kill the hats.
Right, you are Nagura Skyline top, seeming to be one step ahead of the game here. CBA in the meantime, just trying to finish off Lady Haycoil, well dealing with, of course, those extra orbs that are spawning from Explosive by keeping those ads live. Seems to be absolutely no problem, and the Rogue is benefiting highly from it. Lady Haycoil does go down, but now they have a 27% trash differential to make up in order to even get close to Skyline top at the moment. Skyline top is just about to finish Serpentrix. Nice clean kill, deal with both heads, no problem. They don't take that risk that CBA did. Doesn't cost them any reses there, and they're going to go to their skip in a moment here.
Yes, probably. We see CBA actually going to pull some trash. They have to catch up a lot, as I said earlier. So let's see how big the pull is going to be and how risky it's going to be with the bolstering and Explosive.
And you know, we keep discussing ways in which they can catch up, but we're also ignoring that they're another 35 seconds behind because of the deaths right now. Skyline top still having a flawless run. They finally down what they need to kill there with Serpentrix, and they're moving over to the skip. As we can see, King Deepbeard ominously sitting there at the top. Fun fact, apparently, if I'm not mistaken, King Deepbeard is actually son of Morgrim Tidewalk, if I'm not mistaken, from SSC. I'll have to double check that. If that's not true, it wasn't me that said that, it was somebody else. But nonetheless, we do see the infamous boat skip here. So as you can see, the Demon Hunter does climb up right away. Warrior leaps up, and they will be draping over the side of the cliff there as they all kind of jump in and spam click that mount to make sure that they get up. Now, there's a problem, of course. Some of them are more laterally challenged than others, and they're having difficulty jumping up the mountain. Nonetheless, they will get there in due time.
All right, so they actually have Bloodlust ready at this point. Let's see if they actually use it on King Deepbeard or if they save it for the last boss.
If they even ever get to King Deepbeard in the first place. The DK, of course, not being known well for mobility and certainly flexing their muscle in that regard there. They're doing as well as they can, and finally they get in here in the meantime. CBA now dealing with a bunch of extra trash in that kind of forested area near Serpentrix, where there's one extra Hydra and a ton of extra crabs, but we do see another death come up from them in the meantime.
Yeah, the Demon Hunter actually died, and as we all know, you spawn at the beginning of the dungeon if you release, and they probably don't want to waste a battle rest. Actually, they don't have a battle rest. And we see another death. So this is going to be very interesting. They might have to full wipe and actually piling up.
Yeah, that's going to be rough. They do actually have one battle rest, if I'm not mistaken. But nonetheless, exactly as you said, the tank goes down now. This is getting really hairy, which I would know, of course. But now, the problem is here, they bolstered that Hydra so
it's a very big
much.
Hydra.
It was such a sloppy pull from them. That Hydra is going to destroy everyone. That's why the tank goes down. That Hydra does a very off GCD, unexpected nature hit on the tank on top of heavy melee, so the tank just dropped right away. Now let's focus our attention here on King Deepbeard, the fourth, or could be any of the bosses, but the last boss here for Skyline top before they have access to the Wrath of the Shara. Now, nothing too crazy here. It's pretty tank and spank. Now, the main mechanic here, of course, is that Quake. Eventually, periodically, he will cast Quake on the players that will drop a kind of, you know, that cracked ground as we see on the ground. And because it's Mythic mode, 5 seconds later, an aftershock will happen that will pulse damage from all of the areas. So the smart thing to do here is to drop your Quake, move away, and then keep dropping all your Quakes in the same spot so that you limit the amount you have to move the boss.
Yeah, especially if you have multiple melee, the space can get very, very tight if you don't put them on top of each other.
Now, as a caster here, because, you know, I've been professional Shadow Priesting lately, it is a bit tougher, right? Because you get pushed around by the wind. Sometimes you get pushed into a Quake and you're trying to cast, and of course that bubble mechanic comes up as well. Well, you have to absorb a certain amount of damage before it explodes for too much damage on the group.
Yeah, we also saw they pulled the snail actually for the Warlock for multi-dotting, and they still need percentage as well.
Yeah, so we have about, if I'm not mistaken, 8% from the 4 remaining mobs before Wrath of Shara. So as we alluded to earlier, really helps that Warlock multi-dotting that snail on the side, and they're likely going to finish it off to get to around that 92%. As you can see, they're piling up on that poor innocent snail there, having a gooey time. They're going to finish it off, get it to about 92% health, and they're going to round about and head off to the final boss.
All right, so we see the other group still pretty far behind. They still need trash percentage, and yeah.
Huge bolstering there as well. I think the size of those Gilbins, I mean, there's like boss size there, so they're really having some trouble with, you know, the dangerous thing with these, because these mass pulls on live are very popular, where you pull a ton of the crabs and the Gilbins. They all have similar health pools, but one misstep in terms of calculation, you kill 11 of them and one guy has, you know, 10% health. He's, you know, 10 stacks of bolster, whatever it may be. You're having boss size mobs. I mean, you could see their health pool there. It looks really small, but that's actually tens of millions of health. It's going to take them a while to chew through that. While in the meantime, of course, pulling 2 mobs at a time, Skyline top, well dealing with the interrupts here, and you do have to kill all 4 of these mobs before getting access to Wrath of Ashara.
Yeah, it is actually very risky to pull 2 Nagas at the same time, especially with 45, because you do need to interrupt a lot of their casts, and on top of that, there's also the Polymorph and the Arcane Swirly that needs to be dispelled by the healer, and it has a cooldown on the dispel, so it might be interesting to see.
That's right. If two of them spawn more frequently than every 8 seconds, they're not going to be able to get that Dispel off. Nonetheless, they do handle it well. They go on to the third one. Now, this one also does that kind of AoE magic binding on the group here, which is nice to have a priest for, which we don't often see in Mythic Plus, but a priest is able to mass Dispel this. Nonetheless, you know, you do have freedom from the Paladin, pre-AMS, things like that, so they should be able to handle it pretty well. Warlocks are usually quite indestructible against things like that. There comes the Arcane Ball again. After this one, they move on to the fourth, and then to Wrath of Ashara. CBA, I mean, they're still dealing with some of the trash on the outskirts. They're still only at 88%. They're only now finally getting into the range where they can do their boat skip, kill that snail as well, and rear up. I mean, they're a good ways behind Skyline at the moment.
Yeah, I think this one pull at the very start that didn't go so well, I think it actually threw them off quite a bit, because they couldn't try to pull again because they probably didn't have any cooldowns for it. So they had to try and get another route. Maybe they didn't have a plan and now they're just winging it. And they had to do some risky pulls to catch up, and yeah, it just didn't work.
DH getting really low there, luckily manages to stay alive, not an extra 5 seconds on their timer. This should ideally line up to 100% for them. They're actually just a bit short. We'll have to keep an eye on that. There were some issues with some of the displays last year. I think has been fixed, so we'll have to keep an eye. Nonetheless, Ashara has now been pulled, and as you said, big advantage here. It's a purely execute boss. 20% below. That Affliction lock and that Warrior are going to have a good time here.
Yeah, maybe the healer might actually pull an extra neutral for the Warlock here to get the last percentage, or maybe it's 100%, maybe it's a bug. We'll see.
It's possible. So a few abilities to watch out for here. Of course, we did see that huge kind of water zone go down. That's a tank ability. Everyone needs to get out of that. After which we kind of have this combined split damage group ability. Now, it is physical damage, so you can actually bop or immune or, you know, go out by yourself if you can survive it. Otherwise, the group needs to split it, and it does hit for percentage HP. So things like Vamp Blood actually maybe aren't always the best idea for the Blood DK. A bunch more healing that has to be done. Nonetheless, they survive it no problem. As this fight goes on, especially at 10% as we're seeing here, he will spawn more storms and more waves and make the entire area much more difficult to maneuver, especially as a caster or healer.
Yeah, especially as a caster. We see the Warrior do an insane amount of damage here in this execute boss. The boss is dropping very low, very, very fast.
I mean, he is just... It's just warm butter. They're cutting through him like warm butter. Deep Beard, of course, has been pulled for CBA. We'll keep an eye on that. He's around in the mid-50s%. They should be able to get that down soon and move their way. I mean, it's going to take an absolute miracle for CBA to win this. Skyline Top's going to need to somehow wipe here or throw the game, but they have 3 battle reses under their belt. At this point, they could just sacrifice people for that split damage as well.
Yeah, so we see CBA. I mean, they tried, but yeah, it was a very good map pick by Skyline Top. So yeah, they dominated.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell this
very clean.
You could tell this was just a very well rehearsed map for this team.
Yes, some very good routes, very nice pull, especially the pull after the first boss was very impressive that they pulled it off.
So now they did indeed have just a bit of trash to do as they immediately run off, but it should take just a moment for them to clean that up. And it looks like we have a tie on our hands here with the 1-1. They're still working on Deep Beard, but I mean, they're substantially behind, not to mention 50 seconds in terms of deaths.
Yes. Well, I think they did a slight miscalculation with the percentage there. So it wasn't 100% clean, but it was almost 100%.
I think they were just trying to throw us off.
Oh, yeah.
They knew we didn't know what was going on. Nonetheless, they're cleaning up that. I'm not sure why they opted to pull one of the higher health mobs, but nonetheless, they'll be cleaning it up. And just a moment, there we go. We have the series tied at 1 apiece.
Yep, every single question I had was, wow, what a perfect run coming out of Skyline Top. So they threw me off at the end there with that last little mob, but obviously a very dominant performance in what has been honestly a very close series. Very happy we've got this double elimination format, so we won't have to say goodbye to either of these teams just yet in this next game, but 1-1 tied up, and I was very impressed by Skyline Top. I thought that was a nice pocket pick, well prepared, and they seemed to execute it flawlessly.
You know, they reminded me of their Skyline D counterpart there. I mean, it was just that they had planned it and they were ready for it. Now, of course, this was their map pick on like Skyline D's before, but they had everything planned out. Everything was clean. You know, all these pulls that you and I don't typically see with the extra Naga after Warlord Parjesh. Everything was great. No problem. Not a single death. You know, a slight misstep with the trash there at the end, but still, nothing too bad.
What did you think, Nigura, of the going into Lady Haycoil's second boss? Because it's something that we talked on the cast a little bit about how most teams will go for Serpentrix because it's a little bit harder before the winds come out, but it seemed to work out very nicely for them.
Yeah, I think the fastest route is to go straight to Lady Haycoil, and I think they were just going for maximum speed. They did very, very clean pulls in general, and they did all those small things to increase the DPS, like pulling the snails and pulling stuff together, and yeah, it was like one of the most difficult affix combinations with bolstering and explosives, and they pulled it off very, very well, very clean.
Yeah, and I wanted to throw to you again with my next question because you're kind of like the DPS expert here. Sorry, Slid. I do forgive you. I do forgive myself. But with the Affliction Warlock and the Warrior, like obviously it was very impactful on the final boss on the Wrath of Ashara with those execute ranges. But how did you feel like it played out in the entire dungeon for them?
I think it played out really well. We don't usually see a lot of Warriors at this time around, especially not on live servers. But I think the Warrior is doing very well. He has a huge burst coming out whenever the cooldowns are up, and execute obviously for the last boss they did a very, very good job. And Warlock is good in general. It's one of the best ranged classes you can have at this point, with the slow ring, with all the utility coming out and insane amount of damage.
Yep, so we did see the perfectly executed run coming out of Skyline top there. It was very clear that they had a plan and they stuck to it in that game. But of course, now that we're tied 1-1, the advantage goes over into CBA's court. If they have a map or affix combination chosen like that, it's very much going to just help them in the same way, you would imagine.
I mean, based on the two series we've seen, it could go both ways, right? I mean, the loser map pick there succeeded for the loser from the first map, and in the previous series, Skyline D just dominated the whole way through. So we're going to have to see if the Skyline counterpart to Skyline D is going to win it up here on the third loser map.
Yep, we will have to see, but we are tied 1-1 in this series right now. Skyline top coming out in that one. It's been a very close series, and honestly, been very impressed by China so far, but Skyline top will not go down without a fight. They bring out their pre-prepared pocket pick and unleash the Wrath of Ashara upon CBA. Now CBA are up against it. Join us after this break to see as the race continues. Will CBA be able to overturn it, or will it be a Skyline affair in the semi-finals? We're all tied up here at the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. CBA versus Skyline Top, 1-1. An excellent pre-practice pick coming out of Skyline Top there. Now we'll have to see if CBA, contrary to their name, have also pre-practiced something, if this loser situation will advantage them. I am your host, Adrian Healing Set Archerlock for the weekend, and joined by with me we have Sloot and Nagura, who had a fantastic cast in that last game. It was really interesting to see how the two teams did their kind of different pull patterns throughout Eye of Ashara, Sloot.
Yeah, there's just so much to talk about. You know, they're doing different bosses and pulls that we don't typically, at least Nagura and I don't typically see on some of the live servers. And then, you know, it was interesting to see that at the end of the day, they all kind of converged to that same boat skip that we're used to. But yeah, lots to discuss. And I mean, Skyline just performed all the better.
Yeah, it was excellent to see. I really like seeing that pre-preparation coming out, really talking about the competitive nature of China as a region. We saw that in that last map. It sounds like we do have the map ready, and I'm hearing that the affix choice is also Grievous coming out of CBA here, Vault of the Warden. So interesting stuff. We're seeing different maps, different affixes coming out of all of these teams. Nagura, what do you think about this coming out of CBA?
I think Vault of the Wardens is not specifically a dungeon that favors a certain team comp. We will see how it goes, but Vault doesn't have, like, it has a lot of bosses there, so single target damage is going to be very, very good on that, in that dungeon.
Yeah, it's something we'll have to see how it does come out, because of course CBA, they have kind of like one of these generic compositions we were expecting, running that double melee, running the rogue, running the demon hunter. No windwalkers yet though. Is that something that surprises you, Slid?
Based on what we're used to seeing, yes. But, I mean, these teams are performing up to snuff nonetheless. So, you know, we keep saying it. They're making these comps work for them, and it's working well. In Volt here, it's going to be really interesting because Nagura, she's absolutely right. 5 bosses here, so lots of single target to do. But also some of the most notoriously dangerous trash in the game coming up to that first boss. We have that mini boss, you know, the Warglaves, and there's just a ton of damage. And we are in a fortified setting here, along with the Grievous, and if I'm not mistaken, Volcanic as well. So that trash is going to be really, really dangerous. We're going to have to see how the groups handle it.
Yeah, and that's something to bear in mind as well. Like, not only are the teams selecting the map when they select this, they're also selecting the predetermined affixes that come with it alongside the one that they select. So each dungeon has a different affix assigned with it based on the developers and the esports team being kind of cruel, I would say, at some points. I want to be a little careful what I say here, but definitely trying to make it a grueling competition for these teams, because honestly, they are the best in the world.
Yes, obviously they are the best in the world. I also wouldn't be playing in this tournament. But yeah, China definitely, like, they stepped up their game. And I think even without Windwalkers, I think we're going to see a lot more Windwalkers in the other regions, especially EU and NA. Even without Windwalkers, as you said, they're doing very well. And they're having some very, very fast times.
So we're expecting, of course, we still haven't seen too many Tyrannicals yet, but it will be fortified. Combined with that Volcanic and the Grievous, it's going to be a lot about how they can deal with some of these like trash packs, in addition to the 5 bosses. We are ready to hop into game. This is game 3 between CBA and Skyline Top. The first game 3 we've had of the day, a close series thus far, an interesting map choice and pathing coming out of Eye of Ashara, but Vault of the Wardens really is the top tier pick. It's a long dungeon with a lot of interesting pulls. We'll have to see how these teams can do, and if CBA can make it work to their advantage.
I hope they BA, as you said earlier, Adrian. Now, as we discussed earlier, some of the most dangerous trash in some of the dungeons, period, is actually this first pull, and leading right up to Glaviana, if I'm not mistaken. She hits really hard. They pull everything. I mean, they're going past her.
Very big pull.
They're going big pull here. They're pulling almost everything. The tank drops down to 5%, already pops that perk immediately. They finally get everything together. The tank is going to be extremely vulnerable now. Just a huge amount of damage coming out, getting that CC up right away, and this is going to be really interesting to watch. Of course, Volcanic's going to be spawning all over the place. In the meantime, of course, Skyline Top doing a very similar pull on the right side of your screen.
Yeah, they did use Bloodlust here. They popped all their cooldowns. This is a very, very interesting pull. I've never seen such a big pull before. This is insane.
Yeah, so most of the mobs going down here, not too much to worry about, but of course Glaviana being the one that we have to focus on. You can see she just hit that 50% range now, and at that point, she will metamorphosize and do increased damage to the group, so there will be a ton of extra damage going on, plus a pulsing AoE damage that it could be quite difficult to handle as a healer.
Yeah, especially on top, there's Grievous too, so the AoE does a lot of damage, and on top of Grievous, it's going to be very interesting to see if the Holy Paladin can keep them up, but it doesn't seem to be a big problem for them. They're actually pretty high on HP.
Yeah, no problem there. Of course, for those at home, Grievous is an increasing stack up to 5 when you're below 90% HP. That will get progressively harder and harder to heal. So it's important for the healer to keep everybody well and topped. And the tank dealing, dipping kind of low there for Team CBA. Perg has already been proc there. Of course, no Perg proc for Skyline Top. So we'd have a bit of extra vulnerability, if you will, for Team CBA. Nonetheless, both teams now moving up, pulling that little packs, the kind of little mob packs before the one last final pull before we see that first boss.
It's going to be interesting to see if they actually skip the trash in this hallway here. On live servers, people do that because there's trash later on that is more efficient to pull, and this one is just very, very hard.
Right, you are. And of course, we do have the Fell Gaze in this pack, and of course, some of those lethal casts that need to be interrupted. They don't care, though. They're going right in. They're going to pull everything. Now, the Fell Gaze is one that I just did mention a moment ago. It has to be interrupted, and you can only hard interrupt it. You cannot kick it. So you have to displace, grip, disorient, whatever. Maybe we do see excellent there. We do have that CC on it because it does spin in a circle, and pretty much anything that comes into contact with it will die.
Yeah, so we see they actually pulled the patrol and the trash group in front of the boss together. The other team actually chose to skip it.
Oh, but they actually don't manage to skip properly, so they do waste their shroud there. The DH getting a bit too overzealous and end up accidentally pulling the pack there. They will have to deal with it. They opt to also use the battle res on the Demon Hunter because we just discussed how dangerous this fortified, trash can be. Nonetheless, of course, Tirathon now the first boss being pulled by Skyline top in the meantime. You know, notables about this boss, there are 3 phases. He will transform into a Vengeance form with big and spiky and mean, and of course a Havoc form after with the Warglaives, which makes absolutely no sense because he throws the Warglaives away earlier and somehow pulls out a second set. Nonetheless, during those phases, we'll see some different abilities come up, but the main thing, of course, is that once he throws those glaives, as we've now seen Nagura, they will start to kind of circle around the room, and it's really important to pre-position properly as a caster and as a healer so you can maximize your uptime.
Exactly. The further you walk towards the pre-position is very important, especially for the caster, so you don't have to move at the very end. Also, later on, there's going to be an I-beam that you need to dodge, and if there's the I-beam to the left of the side and the other line on the other side, you might get in trouble.
So the Warlock, of course, cheesing there a bit, pre-positioning their Warlock portal so they don't have to kind of play ring around the rosy in the well in the middle. Now, it's funny, I was actually about to comment, the tank mechanic here is that you want to make sure during Dark Strikes that you have your active mitigation up, otherwise the boss will gain an absorb shield, you know, obviously slowing you down, you have to chew through that. And as a DK, it's usually not too hard to do. Must have mistimed their Death Strike there, and the boss did indeed gain a bit of a shield there. Nothing too bad, though, they managed to chew through it. As we do see now, though, the ads are starting to pile up. You want to make sure that you interrupt and CC those Fell Furies as they come up.
Yeah, we see the Warlock actually is not running Cephus Secret. I don't see any of the mobs banished. Usually Warlocks would run Cephus and just banish a mob throughout the whole fight, proc their Cephus on cooldown.
Yeah, so we're seeing a similar trash percentage here from the 2 teams. Of course, that extra 2% for Skyline right now coming from just some of those little extraneous mobs on the side that aren't too hard to deal with, but of course don't reward you with much percent. But they are well ahead on Tirathon, not to mention that they have their battle res available and they're, you know, free of any deaths right now, so that's another plus 5 seconds for them. So now there's a bunch of extra damage coming up here from Tirathon right now as he has entered his final form in the Havoc form.
Actually saw the Doomguard die here to the I-beam. Was mispositioned.
He was doomed from the start. Nonetheless, Tirathon about to fall here in just a moment for Skyline top. And, you know, let's talk a bit about this pull coming up right after the boss dies. So you can go left or right here, and at the very edge, the middle of the end of the hall, there's that kind of huge Imp Mother, which, you know, interestingly enough, was actually designed around my great aunt in terms of her skin, but nonetheless, I told them not to do it. Now, usually the tank goes around one side with the group, and you'll actually have a DPS or whoever can do it without dying go around the other side so that you can kind of group all of these imps up together and get that extra percent. And I know typically you usually do that as a boomkin.
Yes, as a druid, you just need some sort of speed buff, and druid also. Oh, we see one death here. The healer actually died. Team CBA.
That's not good, but I think they'll be able to pull off the kill here. Now, there is Grievous on top of the pulsing AoE damage in this last phase. It's going to be really sketchy. The Rogue still hasn't proc cheat death. There's the cheat death proc right now. They still have the Rogue, the Demon Hunter alive, and they do manage to pull it off. But that's an extra 2 deaths plus cheat death gone for the Rogue. They will now, of course, be pulling the imps in the hall, whereas, of course, Skyline top is already well ahead. They're dealing with the Imp Mother and about to go down in the elevator.
Yes. So the Imp Mother has one ability where she throws her hand in the air, and she actually does not have a cast on where you have to pre-move the green pools on the floor. Actually might get in trouble, but they did very well there.
She does throw her hand up in the air just like she doesn't care indeed. Now, going down here in the elevator, oftentimes we see groups, I mean, typically on live, people just kind of, you know, hang out a bit and wait for the elevator. Most teams running, speed running, will actually pop an avalanche potion to go down as quickly as they can, and of course pull everybody's favorite boss, Inquisitor Tormentum.
Yeah, we'll see. They also pull some Defilers here on the side. There's 2 different kind of dogs here, Defilers and Scorchers. You do want to pull the Defilers. You do not want to pull the Scorchers because as they die, they actually have an explosion on the whole group. So yeah, we see them pulling some Defilers, getting some enemy forces done here.
and it is fortified, not to
Yes.
mention. Yeah, so it's quite a bit of extra damage. Now, there's two ways to typically deal with Inquisitor Tormentum. One of them is that at 70 and 40%, he will blink to one of the four corners of the room and spawn some of the trash mobs that we've seen in previous expansions that will have different abilities. Now, you have one of two options. One is to chase the boss to that corner. The other, of course, is to kind of lead the boss up the stairs here and, you know, line of sight and wait for the mobs to come to you. With both teams having DKs, nonetheless blood DKs, I would assume, and of course they are here indeed, following the boss to that area because they can easily group the mobs up together on top of the boss.
Yes, there's some trouble when you line of sight at the end because it takes a while for the mobs to actually come up, and some mobs actually don't move at all. Even if you line of sight, just they don't care.
I would say, Nagura, this is probably one of the more dangerous corners here because we do have that Fellor that kind of drops aggro, runs out, stuns people, knocks them up, and if you let one of those seeds from the Warlock go out, it does a devastating amount of damage on the group.
Yeah, the Fellor actually does always charge at the furthest target away, so they can actually predetermine who is getting charged on, and it's probably going to be the Holy Paladin.
I'd assume they stay out indeed. And as you can see, we do have those kind of swirly beams shooting at the players randomly. If you're not facing that beam from that Tormented Eye, on the wherever it actually may be, around the middle of the area, then you will be disoriented for a few seconds. And should the tank get disoriented, the mobs will actually drop aggro for that time and end up smacking one of the other players.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see that the other group chose to line of sight and do the other strat.
That's really weird to me, especially with the Blood DK. For most of these doors, you don't need the AoE grip, especially with the Mogu door, which actually we're not going to see today. But even if it's stationary mobs, you can grip one of the Fra mobs on top of the other one. So the problem, I mean, there's innately no real problem with this strat, but it is a bit slower because you have to wait for the mobs to come to you. Nonetheless, they're doing it fine, no problem. CBA chewing through Tormentum. They're about to hit their second set of jail as well. In the meantime, 26% for Skyline top, dealing with that last the last set of mobs that come up there, and they should be able to finish them off quickly and start moving on to what could be one of either bosses, either Ash Golem or Lord Glazer.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see which boss they choose because Bloodlust is going to come up soon, and yeah, depending on which route they choose, the Bloodlust is going to help a lot. And we see the trash percentage, CBA is actually slightly ahead, and they're not too far behind in the boss percentage either, so they managed to catch up quite a bit after failing the skip and after having some deaths on the first boss.
Another death on top of it for the Demon Hunter there. I mean, these add up, Nagura.
Yeah.
That's already 20 seconds on top of the fact that they're slightly behind in the meantime. They don't have a battle rest, so they're going to have to deal with the rest of this boss for manning, which they'll likely be able to do it, although those mobs are still alive, so we have to be careful with that. But it's just going to take them that much longer to kill. In the meantime, another death going down for the healer there, and that's going to spell certain doom in just a moment. Rogues goes down as well. I mean, look, the thing is, a Blood DK can stay alive on this for a long time, but is it worth it? Absolutely not. It's going to take them ages. So they're going to wipe it right up, and in the meantime, Skyline already moving ahead to the trash on the side.
It was so close, and now they wiped. Feels bad. Okay, so we see we see them pull the lady here. It's gonna be interesting to see how they deal with this because the Scorchers do explode for a lot of damage. They can't kill them at the same time because if they both explode at the same time, the group might actually wipe. So they have to focus one of them or banish one. A Warlock can actually banish one. If he sees that they both die at the same time, he just banishes one and it's fine. Of course, you can't kill the mini boss before you kill the Scorchers, else they're gonna get buffed and kill you.
Yep, so they're cleaning it up nicely, and we did talk about, I mean, CBA did just wipe, but also the run back if you wipe on Tormentum, which is so bad. You have to start all the way back in Tirathon's room, still go down the elevator, use another Avalanche pot nonetheless. So it looks like they are actually opting to go for Ash Golem first, which is our resident fire giant, which we'll see encased in ice at the start here, and that's actually one of the major mechanics of this fight. Once you aggro him, some statues will spawn on the sides of the platform that after one of the players interacts with them, it will freeze him for 20 seconds with a debuff known as Brittle, and during that time he will take 20% increased damage. So that's where players mostly want to get all their CDs ready.
Yeah, so their Bloodlust cooldown actually came off right now. It's interesting because the Glacier actually also gets a damage increase after the intermission phase, and the damage increase on Glacier is actually for more percentage, but it doesn't last as long.
Right, you are. So of course, tons of damage going out. You can see Ash Golem's health just chunking down. We're of course in a fortified setting, meaning the bosses are just a bit easier without that tyrannical health buff on top of them. Ash Golem should be finishing the Brittle phase in just a moment. Of course, things are starting to heat up here again as lava wreaths are thrown all over the place. Now, the mechanics here, those lava zones innately aren't too dangerous. You can absorb them by stepping over them, pre-AMSing, pre-immuning, or just eating them if you're the tank or durable DPS. But he will spawn some extra fire adds on the side, and should those fire adds touch one of those zones, they will, of course, enrage and do a ton of damage to the raid.
Yes, we can also see they have 95% enemy forces, so they're almost done. We're probably going to expect a skip at the very end with... they don't have a rogue, so they'll probably have to use Invis potions or have the tank pull mobs to the side and walk by.
Right, of course, with that avalanche combination as well, there will be a couple more mobs they do need to deal with by default, likely the 4 spider pack. But let's, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. We still have to deal with Glazer, which, can be quite a handful himself. Ash Golem should be going down here soon. At this point, the final set of statues just spawned. By the time they RP and actually freeze the boss, he'll be dead anyway, so not too much concern for Skyline here. They will have to, of course, in a moment, rush back over, equipping their speed sets, things like Aggramar for the DK. In the meantime, finally, we're hitting Inquisitor Tormentor's second gate once again for CBA as they struggle to kind of finish this boss off and catch up as much as they can. Skyline now heading over to Glazer.
Yeah, they're going to be very, very far behind. There has to be something going wrong for Skyline, for the other team to actually catch up. This wipe was devastating for them. It was at the very, very end, and yeah, it cost them a lot of time.
A lot of time, indeed. So here we are, Lord Glazer, as we know him, our resident eyeball boss, always keeps an eye on things here in the dungeon. So important to note that about 40 seconds into the pull here, he will immune and kind of raise some statues and glare a beam that you will have to use the statues, kind of like mirrors, to redirect around the room back into his bum. That will shatter the shield and make him very vulnerable. But in the meantime, especially as a ranged player, you have to position yourself really well, Nagura, for these orbs coming out of the boss.
Yeah, so there's 4 orbs coming out of the boss, and once they hit the wall, they actually redirect and fixate on one of the players. So if you position yourself close to the boss, then they will redirect to you, and if they hit the boss, they actually will disappear and deal damage to the boss.
Right, it actually usually focuses the closest player to the wall, if I'm not mistaken, their target. So here we are in this transition phase. The boss is taking 99% reduced damage. You want to make sure you kill that overloaded lens. If the beam passes through that lens that they just killed, it will do immense damage and probably wipe the group. So as you can see, they're just prepping now. A bit slow with the transition from the statues nonetheless. During this time, once that shield is shattered for, if I'm not mistaken, about 10 to 12 seconds, the boss will take 100% increased damage. So this is the time to do as much damage as you can. And you can see Glazer's health just rocketing.
Yeah. He's definitely dying real fast. I don't think they will need another phase. He's probably going to go down here. And we see CBA is actually on the mini-boss now, so they're catching up a little bit, but they're still pretty far behind.
Glazer about to go down for Team Skyline top in just a moment, 10% left. But yeah, I mean, CBA is just so far behind right now. They're literally 2 bosses behind at the moment, and slightly behind on trash. I know, about to be about the same. Okay, actually, they're about the same trash. Looks like they'll be heading over to Glazer first, likely because their buffs and CDs and everything are completely misaligned from what they planned them to be because of that wipe. Now, we'll be seeing Skyline head over in just a moment. I would assume they skip the Jailer, which is another one of those kind of mini-boss style mobs. They'll likely avalanche down the elevator, depending on their luck with the elevator timing at this point. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, they're going to have that skip in the dark.
Yes, so since they don't have a rogue, they probably have to play the 4 spiders because the Invis potion won't last as long, so they can skip everything. Here they do need to rest the tank as he pulled the mini-boss to the left side so everyone else can pass. So they lose a little bit of time of resting him back up, which the other group won't do because they have a rogue. So they do have Shroud. But yeah, they're probably going to pull the four spiders and then use Avalanche plus Invis potion to skip the rest of the trash except the last mob.
So down they go, indeed, the elevator on the way down. I'm not really sure... why did the Warlock die there? The Warlock died there. He's now back up. They're at the bottom. The Demon Hunter, of course, because they can glide, goes safely to the bottom, grabs the light ahead of time in order to pre-prepare it for the team coming back up. The tank typically, of course, grabs the light. They will kill this first 4-pack of spiders. It just makes life easier, plus they need that extra percentage. Now, after this, as you mentioned, they will do a combination of Invis potting and Avalanche potioning past all of the trash to the last mandatory mob that they need to kill in order to open the door to Cordana.
Yes, so we see the other group is actually in Glacier now. They're, as I said, still 2 bosses behind, so it's going to be a struggle for them to catch up. There's not too many things that can happen to Skyline here, unless they fail a skip. I've saw it happen a couple of times that people either didn't use Avalanche, or they got too close to the mobs, or they used an ability and they got out of stealth. It can be very difficult to do the skip if you do something wrong.
That's very true, especially if you accidentally, those spider webs on the bottom do damage to you, so if you pop them at the wrong time, especially if you're too close to one of the mobs, you're going to get in trouble. Nonetheless, they seem to be no problem here. They get through it quite well, grab the Broodmother, and they're going to bring her right over to that final door before the final boss, Cordana, which is, of course, also the remaining 3% that they need, perfectly calculated ahead of time. In the meantime, Glazer going down quite clean for Team CBA, no problem. They're rushing over now to Ash Golem, but they're substantially behind.
Yes, so they're focusing the one mob here as he dies, the door actually opens. They still have to finish off the Broodmother, but the healer can go through and trigger the event in the meantime as there is some RP.
Yeah, that does take a bit for Cordana to spawn indeed. 99% should have hit 100 in just a moment for the remaining trash. Now, Cordana herself, a bit of a long fight, not too difficult. Well, not too difficult as long as it's not tyrannical right now. So they will need to kind of play with this light mechanic. You don't want to be left alone in the dark here. So once she spawns, she will have kind of two transition phases. At 75%, she will spawn an image of herself, and she herself will disappear, and you will have to kill that image in order to retrieve the light and get her out of stealth. And then at 40%, she will immune herself and kind of cast four image walls that will go through randomly in the stage, and players will have to find the gap in that wall to go to safety.
Yeah, and you can only see the walls if you have this light, else they're in darkness. So the player who has the light actually has to be very smart and lead the group through the walls.
Indeed. So Cordana pulled here now. She does do a stun and roundhouse kick on the tank that will punt them backwards. Of course, DK is not known to be the most mobile tanks in the world, so you have to be careful where you're turning your back to. And Nagur, I know you know that glaive very, very well. If you do get hit by that glaive, it is spelling a bunch of trouble. It will hit you, splash AoE, and deal 100% increased damage debuff for, I think, 8 seconds to everybody that gets hit in the splash.
Yeah, there's actually one interesting thing about these glaives. As they spawn out of the boss, you're actually immune to get hit, but if you're further than 20 yards away, then you do get hit by it. So you have to find the sweet spot. Either you're close on the boss or you're as far away so you can still react and dodge it.
Indeed. So Cordana now out of her first kind of transition phase. They do well to get her out of stealth. Now, too little, too late, but Team CBA actually does have an advantage on this fight when they get to it because they can immediately get her out of stealth once she hides at 75% with that Hunter Flare. Nonetheless, I don't think we'll be getting to that point, but I don't want to, you know, I'm not a prophet. I can't predict this. We'll have to see just exactly how Skyline does. In the meantime, Cordana just about to hit that 40% mark. They do well to kind of throw the light around, make sure that they're eliminating those void zones on the ground.
Yeah, so the boss is about to hit 40%. They have to clean those last 2 purple zones on the ground. We see the Warlock actually doing it, so the Holy Paladin can DPS the boss. And you see, he's actually doing a lot of damage. He's actually doing more than a Warlock.
The Warlock probably not doing much on account of being on light duty right now. So the first 2 walls usually spawn pretty close together in terms of time. I believe this phase takes 40 seconds, if I remember correctly. There's the 3rd wall spawning now. You can kind of see ahead of time where that gap spawns, so you can pre-position well. 4th wall should be spawning in just a moment. There it is. The player is well positioned. And now where the players are in that corner near that statue is always where the first mob of the last phase will spawn. So they can pre-position there, and once that mob spawns, it will make Cordana immune. But if you stun it, it will of course break her shield.
Yeah, so in the last phase, as you said, you have to stun them up so you can break her shield and DPS her or kill it. But usually it's much faster to just stun them up. So there's the glaives coming out again that you need to dodge. The Warlock is standing in a very difficult position. He might get hit by it, but oh, he actually died.
Well then. They do use one of their battle reses there, get it up. I mean, at this point, they're in pretty safe motion. The Vengeance Demon, the Havoc Demon Hunter is the one with the light at the moment. Cordana down to 7%. Looks like it's going to be a pretty clean sweep. CBA only now getting to the dark area, and it looks like Skyline's going to be able to clean this up and take the series 2-1.
Another the pools, like the order that the bosses went down, but another convincing win for Skyline top. On the map choice of CBA, they will be advancing to that all Skyline affair later in the tournament. Congratulations to them. And I mean, it's been really fun. Like, they're playing these different strategies. I think you guys were even saying during the cast at the start of that one, they had a massive, really confident pull at the start of that one, and it worked so well. For
sure. I mean, they're both playing different strategies. One of them played a strategy where they didn't wipe, and then one played a strategy where they did wipe, and one was more successful. But no, you're absolutely right. And, you know, I was really impressed that was a huge pull at the start. And, you know, I think where it started to kind of unravel for CBA was that stealth skip that you were alluding to, that I guess the Demon Hunter got just a bit too close. One of the mobs saw him, and it started to just kind of unravel there. And I think that the final nail in the coffin was really that Tormentor wipe.
Yeah, and it's such a shame, right? Because you come into it with a game plan like CBA, this was their map choice, their affixes as well. Maybe something like that can really unravel your strategy for the entirety, but credit where credit's due. Skyline top coming out with, I think, 0 deaths, or just that random Warlock death, right?
That was the third death.
Three, yeah.
Okay, so they did have a couple of deaths, but ultimately, very good run from them. They had a very clean one, and I mean, this kind of is what we were saying, right? Like, this is the number 4 and 5 team from China, but even these guys looking so competitive, like, globally, I could see them doing well over a run like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's going to be very difficult against Skyline D. As we saw, they had very, very clean runs in the 2-0. But yeah, they had some very, very big pulls, especially in Vault. I was very impressed by the first pull, and everything else seemed to be very clean for them as well.
So what did we think about YD playing that warrior? Because I was looking at the DPS meters a lot, someone who doesn't necessarily know which classes should be on top of the DPS when it's single target or AoE, and he seemed to be one of those guys that was just almost always at the top of the meters. Even single target on some of the bosses, he was bursting for like 4 or 5 million DPS. Do you think that's something we'll see from other teams, or is it just YD like playing so well on the class?
I think Warrior is still a little bit behind in damage compared to a Windwalker Monk, and I think he's just more comfortable playing Warrior. So I don't think we're going to see Warrior that much, but he's doing really well, and he's doing a lot of damage with it for sure.
Well, it was interesting to see either way. We do have the brackets ready for you guys right now. We are, of course, 2 series into the day, so we've got our first 2 semi-finalists in that upper bracket, or round 2 as it's named on the graphics. Skyline D versus Skyline Top. That's going to be an interesting one, since it is, of course, the 2 Skylines battling it out, the 2 kind of methods we were also branding them as for China.
And Skyline Top is on the bottom right now, so it's completely throwing me off at the moment. But
poor guys.
It is going to be really interesting to see, especially with the loser bracket this time around. I mean, any of these teams could have just a huge hero series coming up and you know, winning the whole thing, but I'm really excited to see that Skyline matchup.
Yeah, and Firefang, of course, will be playing against CBA. It wasn't populated in there, but I think Firefang, it's fair to say they weren't the strongest team we've seen so far today, whereas CBA, I think they were one of those guys where maybe they had not the best pull at this point in this instance, but it was an overall good map 1 for them. They actually took map 1, which was kind of the neutrally decided one, and then map 3 as well. It wasn't super one-sided, Nico?
No, I think it threw them off when they didn't manage to do the skip. And then if you have one plan coming into a dungeon and something just doesn't go right, something goes wrong, then your whole plan is just ruined, and you have to figure out like a plan B or figure out another route, and all your cooldowns don't line up anymore as you want them to line up, and I think that's why they struggled.
Yep, well, I think we'll have to see how they do progress further in the tournament. Of course, the goal for these teams is to get to that top 2. They want to get to the global finals. Both the Skyline teams are just 2 series away from doing that. The winner, of course, of their match will only be 1 game away. Completing the worst sweep, we do have the reverse sweep completed by Skyline Top, and it will be an all-Skyline affair later. But now we're moving on to some of the more fun teams in the competition. We've got no healer against Ying Ying Ying. I'm sorry, Jack, if there's no healer in this next one.